Before our next speakers here, I wanted to announce the winner from Choice Connections exhibitor drawing. They had a little drawing for a plant to take home. Is a Mary O'Neill still here? Mary, you have a plant to take home with you. It'll be in the exhibitor room, but thank you.
We're losing people.
We'll get started in a minute.
All right.
We'll get started in just a second. So, okay, thank you.
Sounds good.
So then at the beginning, we're gonna give real brief introductions, like our real quick one.
Right.
So I'm just gonna say I'm this person,
Okay, and I'll say,
and you'll say you're that person, right?
I'm
And then,
that person.
and then I'll say, here's what you're gonna hear,
Okay.
and then I'm gonna
Do you
ask
feel
them.
ready to get started here?
Yeah.
Thank you both so much.
And then I'll get people.
Okay, everyone, why don't we take our seats for our final presentation today of the Caring for People with Memory Loss Conference. Our next two speakers are largely going to introduce themselves, but we have with us today Dr. Abel Knochel, Associate Professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth. We're really thrilled he was able to join us here in person today. And then also Mary Grace St. Clair, a former volunteer at Park Nicollet Hospital Mental Health Program. Their presentation will be on transgender and non-binary older adults' experiences and needs. So please join me in welcoming our two next wonderful speakers. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Like you said, I'm Abel Knochel, Knochel like on your hand. I teach up at University of Minnesota Duluth, although I split my time between the Twin Cities and the Twin Ports. I use they, them pronouns, and I teach in a social work department. I'm really glad to be here with you today.
and my name is Mary Grace St. Clair. I'm a transgender female, and the pronouns I prefer are female, she, her, and hers. And I'm also happy to be here today with you to share some of my story.
Yeah. And Mary Grace and I met probably, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Through the Minnesota Transgender Aging Project. We also know each other from a Transgender and Nonbinary Elders Social Club that got started during the pandemic online. So that's how we know each other. And today we'll share some basic concepts with you, just to make sure we're all talking the same language. You'll hear some about experiences of being a trans older adult, give you a chance to kind of contemplate some of the needs that trans and non-binary people have in older adulthood, and we'll give a few specific considerations about dementia. And then finally, there's a handful of resources we want to leave you with in case you want to learn more. So, but before we start yammering on and on, I'd like you to at least make sure you've said hello to somebody else in this room. It's a little different than some past years at this conference because of the pandemic. Thanks, pandemic year 3. So what I'd like you to do, if you are at a table with other people, just turn to them, give your name, give your pronouns, and give a word or phrase about how you're feeling about this presentation. And if you're by yourself, don't be shy, just walk over to a table where someone else is sitting by themselves, say hello, and then come back to your table. All right. And if you don't go to a table, we'll go to your table.
Yeah, go to your table.
They gotta get up and run around,
Yeah,
don't they?
yeah.
And then I'm gonna have them do a show of hands. New to understanding, know a bit about, know a fair amount.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
All right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can put it real close. I can overpower a microphone.
Very bad sitter. So they're still talking. That's good.
That's good.
Yep, I like that.
This is a cool place.
Yeah, this is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
All right. So, great. Well, so we're curious about what you know or don't know about this particular topic. So I'm going to ask for just a show of hands about trans and non-binary identities. Are you pretty new to understanding? Who in here is like, I could use the basics, this is all brand new? All right, how about you know a little bit about it, just enough maybe to be dangerous or have some basics down? That's a lot of you. And then how many of you feel like I know a fair amount about trans and non-binary identities? All right, so we've got the full spectrum in this room. Wonderful. How about trans and non-binary aging? Who feels like you're pretty new to understanding aging among trans and non-binary people? All right. Oh, good. Anybody feel like they know a bit about it? All right, a fair amount. All right. Well, it remains to be seen. Well, some of you may have things to add, and I sure hope that you'll add them, especially during that half hour of kind of give and take in a little while. Finally, I'm just curious, who in here knows well someone who is trans or non-binary? Great. How about an older adult who's trans or non-binary? All right. All right, well, no matter where you are in understanding or thinking about these topics or having experience, welcome. Oh, here we go. That's our little thing. All right, so I want to start with a few key concepts just to make sure we're all talking the same language in here. So the first concept up there is gender identity. Gender identity simply means how do you know and understand your gender? Someone asks you your gender, do you say, I'm a guy? Do you say, I'm a woman? Do you say something else? It's what you know about who you are. That's it. And every one of us has a gender identity, right? Now, where it gets trickier is we're all assigned a gender when we're born. And now, if you were assigned a gender when you were born, say you were born, the doctor says that's a female, your family says, yay, that's a girl, raises you as a girl, you grow up to know yourself as a woman, would say that makes you cisgender. That's the fifth term there, which just means all of it lines up, right? Who you were told you were is who you know yourself to be. If, on the other hand, who you were told you were or assigned to be is not who you know yourself to be, there's a mismatch, would say you're transgender. But that's the very basic difference between those terms, right? So if, for instance, for me, I was certainly one of those that the doctor said, that's a girl. And that's not the case, right? I'm a transmasculine person. That's who I know myself to be, and so there's a mismatch there. That makes me trans. It also, incidentally, would make me non-binary. That's a term for folks who their gender identity doesn't fit neatly into the man box or the woman box. Maybe they're somewhere on a spectrum in between the two. Maybe they're third gender or some other identity entirely. Sometimes that's cultural, sometimes that's just how they know themselves to be. Gender expression, which is the second one up there, is how each of us brings our gender into the world every day. When you get up in the morning, what clothes do you put on? What fabrics are they made out of? What cut are they made? What colors are they? When you go to something fancy, do you stick on a tie and a suit? Do you stick on a dress? How do you decide what to put on your body? How do you decide how to walk? You know, what's the patterns of your talking? What roles do you take on in your family, in your community? And how we choose to present ourselves and express ourselves may be masculine, it may be feminine, it may be somewhere in the middle. And sometimes that varies on a daily basis or depending on who we're around. And for some people, it's always consistently masculine, consistently feminine, or consistently somewhere in between. So that's what we mean when we're talking about gender expression. One more thing I want to just introduce is, the research is catching up to people's identities. And with gender identity, what we're coming to understand is that that isn't static for everybody. Some people know their gender identity, and that gender identity doesn't shift over a lifetime. For other people, it's a bit more dynamic. It may shift over the course of their lifetime in some way or other. And that's true even among transgender folks, that for some of us, we know our identity, we transition and live into that identity, and that's it. And other folks do that, and they never land at a static place. All right, last concept I wanted to bring in, or set of concepts, is up there at the end, which is really talking about privilege and oppression in identities. And there are at least three that end up at play if you're talking about a trans or non-binary older adult. At least a couple of those will be present, right? You've got cisgenderism, which is really, if you're one of those people where everything lines up, the world is kind of set up for you. People don't usually make you prove what your gender is. They don't necessarily doubt you when you say who you are. And systems are sort of set up to work well. People understand a cisgender identity, and it means you don't have to think a whole lot about it. If you've got a transgender identity, you have to think about it a bit more. And it can get in the way. There may be some opportunities that you're constrained from, or doors are shut, right? We know there's quite a bit of discrimination in employment, for instance, in housing, certainly from care providers, for a few examples. So there are ways that living in this particular identity can cause a person some trouble, cause some oppression. So that's what we mean by cisgenderism. Ableism is not about me as Abel. It's about physical and mental ability. And especially if you're a caregiver for a person with dementia, you know that, that if somebody is not able in their cognitive capacity or their physical capacity, people will treat them as less than, right? May look at them as more expendable, as less valuable, may try to make decisions for them that they can make for themselves, things like that. And if you're cognitively and physically and mentally able, the world works pretty well for you. That's the concept there. And then the last one is ageism, right? If you're just an adult in your 30s, you don't have to think much about things, and the world kind of works well for you. And if you're getting silver-haired and going along, you may find that the people who thought you were really smart a couple decades ago, all of a sudden think you've got a whole lot less to say that's important and a whole lot less to contribute, right? So doors may start to close. You may go to a doctor with a malady, and they may say, well, body parts wear out. Well, learn to live with that, right? In a way that might not be true in kind of what people consider prime of life. So, and again, so if you're a trans or non-binary older adult, you may be facing some combination of these. All right. We good with those concepts? I'm going to turn it over to Mary Grace for a while.
Well, as Abel said, I'm Mary Grace St. Clair, and I am a transgender female. My age is 66, so I fall in that senior category also. I'm also a traumatic brain injury survivor, one of the invisible disabilities that people don't really know because I look perfectly normal. And I have memory issues and aphasia. 19 years ago, I was involved in a serious motorcycle accident where I sustained a traumatic brain injury. My neck was broken, my spine was broken in 4 places. I had 2 broken legs, and my sternum and ribs were crushed, and my heart and my breathing had stopped. When paramedics arrived, I was basically dead. They got my heart started again and transported me to Regents Hospital. My heart stopped again at the hospital, and once in the hospital, I was put into a medically induced coma. There was not much hope for me to survive, and doctors predicted that if I did survive, I'd be paralyzed. My doctors also told me that my brain injury had greatly diminished my executive thinking and organizational skills, and that I shouldn't expect much more recovery in those areas. I had also lost my identity. My past identity was was presenting to be as male as I could. Before this accident, I was a production manager at a company that I worked for 30 years. And I was unable to return to that job that I really enjoyed. So at 48 years old, I became retired and disabled all at the same time. I'm transgender. What does that mean? Physically, I was born with male characteristics. So back in the 50s, if you looked male, that is what was put on your birth certificate. And this was how you were expected to live your life. By the time I started school, I already knew that I was different, and other kids saw it too, and I was bullied. I really tried to be one of the guys, but with little success. I took on the most dangerous sport I could find, and that was ski jumping. It's not even a sport anymore in high school because it was too dangerous. Even though I lettered in my sophomore year, and wearing my letter jacket didn't make me any more male, and I still wasn't part of the group. I always tried to doing the most dangerous things to fit in. I raced motorcycle on flat track. I worked at nailing shoes on draft horses, dark water recovery scuba diver. The list goes on and on. But again, I didn't get to be one of the guys. The challenges and struggles all these years resulted in a diagnosis of severe depression. As a 20-year-old adult, I was institutionalized for 28 days in a young adult psychiatric ward. I always remembered when my psychiatrist told me that I had a borderline personality disorder. I guess that's where they threw transgenders back then filled me with antipsychotics, antidepressants, and sent me on my way, telling me, all you have to do is buck up and act like a man. Even my doctor, someone that I had looked to for help, bullied me. I never looked at myself as a woman trapped in a man's body. I just wanted to live as who I am, a woman, and quit pretending to be male. As a transgender woman, what are things that others do or say that hurt me? Calling me by my dead or old name, not using the proper pronouns, she, her, and hers, not looking at me when talking to me. The hurt comes when the behavior keeps happening over and over again. When it's repeated, I must see it as intentionally hurtful. What helps me? The easiest thing to do is just treat me like there is no difference. Call me by my name and use my proper pronouns. I just wanted to be treated like I dress and act, just a middle-aged woman. So the next slide, what we need from systems and society. A few years later, still recovering, still in constant pain from my peripheral neuropathy, I became a full-time volunteer at Methodist Hospital. The areas that I volunteered in were the Park Nicollet Foundation, Hospital Elder Life Program, and Inspire Stroke and Brain Injury Program. In Inspire, my duties were to assist the speech therapist while she was teaching recent stroke survivors how to swallow again. I liked doing this because it gave me a chance to give back to the patients who were just starting on their recovery. The same place I had been a few years before, when I had to relearn how to walk, swallow, breathe. I was able to connect with them and help them through some of their initial fears. The HELP program, HELP is an acronym for Hospital Elder Life Program, was a program that was designed to help patients to not get hospital-acquired delirium while they were in our care. I started the physical transitioning in 2015 at age 59. Seeing a gender therapist, she was the only one to say, I didn't have to pretend to be male anymore. That was my whole past identity. My new identity was female. I had always believed that was who I am. I was so happy, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my soul. After that, I went on HRT, hormone replacement therapy, a month later, which started my body and my brain to start becoming female. I started voice training with a voice coach, so I would sound more feminine. And yes, girls, you talk differently than men. I was well on my way. I even got a new picture name badge with my correct photo and correct name on it. This happened because Park Nicollet was so inclusive. I was very visible to everyone. I had volunteered as a male presenting person for 5 years before I started transitioning. When it came time for me to come out, I was very afraid to come out to my coworkers, thinking that I would have to leave my volunteering position, which I absolutely loved. The time came that I couldn't hide Mary Grace anymore. Because of the hormone replacement therapy, my breasts had become too large to hide under a sports bra. I decided to tell one of my closest office friends that I was going to start dressing as a woman starting in 2 weeks. To my surprise, she was happy that I told her first, and she was all excited to help me. Next person I told was the CEO of the Park Nicollet Foundation. She was very on board with me and told me, if anybody gives you trouble, I want names. That's pretty good, you know, when you first come out to the second person that they got your back. And being in a leadership position like that, that's like almost like a get out of jail free card or a free pass. It's like, I'm it, I'm going. She was very on board. After telling her and the president of Park Nicollet, my worries disappeared and my transitioning went smoothly. During my time at Park Nicollet, I was able to change some practices that affected our transgender and non-binary patients. I was able to work with human resources and administration to change the way people's names appeared on their charts, on their chart records and their admittance wristband. Their charts would now show the person's preferred name and no other name. It would also show their gender. This change caused people to be called by their correct name and gender by all nurses and staff. As a volunteer with the Hospital Elder Life program, we saw that treating a person as they wish to be identified helped make that person happier and healing would become easier. 1 year ago, I was able to have my gender reassignment surgery here at the U of M. I am the happiest woman in the world. The joy has never faded. And long-term care. My concerns about long-term care are, one, because I have a traumatic brain injury, I'm more susceptible to getting dementia, Alzheimer's, and memory loss. What happens when I forget who I am? Will the staff help me to live my gender? I live on a fixed income, Social Security disability, and I have no savings or assets to draw from to pay for a professional senior care facility. I will probably be sent to a state-funded facility. What level of care is waiting there for me? As part of the focus group of the Minnesota Transgender Aging Project, a large percentage we talked about would rather die than going into transitional care. The focus group also wondered if having a gender reassignment surgery would lead to better care as a female. So those were my concerns. I don't have family that can be there to support me or to advocate for me. So I am kind of one person against the system. And I've kind of been that way ever since my accident happened. So I'm grateful for anything the system has given me, but the unknown, I think, of what's waiting for me if that happens to me, if I become Alzheimer's or dementia. So that is my concerns, and we'll go next to Abel.
All right. So I just want to give a quick pause in case your brain is full of things that you're learning or want to ask about. If you're somebody who needs to write that down, just take 30 seconds to jot it down, and then we'll keep moving. That way you don't forget what you want to ask by the time we get to that part in about 20, 30 minutes. All right. I think one or two of you are still just writing a few things down, but you can catch us in a minute. So just a brief overview of the Minnesota Trans Aging study or project. So Dylan Flunker at Rainbow Health and I had taken this on starting in 2016. And what we were looking to do was to find trans and non-binary older adults. Between the two of us as part of the community, we could think of maybe a handful of people, and we knew there were a whole lot more people to find. And anecdotally, we had been hearing about all of the troubles people had when they tried to access providers. And so we wanted to talk to people, find out what their experiences had been, and what they were expecting as they aged into care. So that's what got us started. We did interviews all over the state, although the bulk of people were in the Twin Cities metro. And that really focused on experiences and expectations with providers of medical care, of aging services, things of that sort. And then following that, a few years after, we decided to do focus groups. And that involved, I think, maybe half dozen to 8 of the people we'd interviewed overlapped, but the rest of them were all new folks that we'd found. And we did focus groups where the same group met once a month for 3 months. We did that in part because as we interviewed people, they would say, do you know anybody else? We don't know anybody else. We're hoping that there's other people. Are we gonna get to meet some other people? And when Dylan and I brought results out and gave not very long notice to come together to give feedback, both here in Duluth, which is the other place where we had a fair number of interview participants, half the people we interviewed in the Twin Cities showed up, half the people up in Duluth, even though it was more than a year after we'd interviewed people and we hadn't kept good contact with them. That's our bad. But people showed up because they wanted to hear about it, but they also wanted to meet other people. So we did these focus groups figuring, well, we're doing research, but we can also give people a chance to meet other folks, and then if they hit it off, they can keep in touch, right? So the idea was maybe break a little bit of that isolation if people found other people they wanted to be buddies with. So that's why we did that. And we looked at some of the same things. We certainly asked about what do you need as you age? What do you think is going to happen as you age? We asked about long-term care. We also asked about support systems and just about their identity itself and how they present it and express it. So a few things that we found. There was a mix of positive and negative experiences that people talked about with providers, but the bar on what made something positive was really low, right? If that provider tried to use the right name or pronoun and asked their trans or non-binary patient or client to educate them, that was considered positive. So low bar. This person just tried to respect my gender identity, kind of like what Mary Grace, you were saying about, just, treat me as I am. Use my name, use my pronouns, right? And some people did have positive experiences, and those really mirrored some of what you had talked about as well, that the system had caught up with putting name and identity in the system, regardless of what someone's legal identity is. Who are they? How can we make sure that from the time they hit the front desk to the time they see their provider, that they're acknowledged as who they are, and that there's been some training done so that people all the way down the line know how to treat this particular person. Because when you're feeling lousy, the last thing you need is for somebody to say something overtly oppressive or even inadvertently not recognize you for who you are. It just adds a thing that makes it hard. It's hard enough to make yourself go to the doctor, right? Or in for something scary like, to check your memory, let alone to go in and have somebody not respect who you are. Anyway, so we'd found that in both of these pieces of the study. We also found that most trans and non-binary people expect bias as they age into care. They just expect it. They expect it whether they go into institutional care. They expect it if someone comes into their home. They think very carefully about who they would allow into their house. If I let somebody in and they're going to care for my body, how are they going to treat me in my own home? If someone comes with Meals on Wheels, are they going to be friendly? If I go to do the free lunch on Wednesdays that the seniors have, how are the other people at that table going to treat me? Are they going to turn their nose up at me, or are they going to invite me to sit next to them? These are the folks that bullied me in school, right? So are they going to be different now that they're older adults, 50 decades, 60 decades, 5 or 6 decades later? So these are some of the concerns, and the concerns are both about that overt oppression, which people certainly have faced, right? Is there a shunning? Is there a ridicule? Is there a refusal to help? But it's also about just not honoring gender, not believing that somebody is who they say they are, insisting on calling them someone that they are not, right? And that these are and understanding where that comes from, and people talked about that. If folks don't know what they don't know, right? And so if you don't know better, how can you do better? And how have we been socialized? And what have we been taught about gender? And what have we been taught about what transgender people are or are not? And that comes through in care unless somebody knows better. And so we understand that, right? But those things factor into whether folks will use the resources they need when they're older. The trans and non-binary older adults I've met are amazing people. They're the survivors, right? They're the ones who made it to older adulthood and transitioned to be who they are in society. And they're strong, and they're vibrant, and they're funny, and they're resilient, and they have needed to stand up for themselves all the way through and endure. And they think about, when I am too frail to do that for myself, who is going to do it? Is somebody going to do it? And am I going to end up in a system of care where someone is looking out for me? So these are the things that come up, just like Mary Grace said. People talk about, you know, how can I avoid getting care? I'm just gonna refuse it, people say, or let me start figuring out my suicide plan now. And that's real and came up from folks. People talk about making a full physical transition, and for some folks, that's what they wanna do. But some people talk about it in terms of, if I make a full physical transition and can pass as cisgender, then when that person goes to bathe me, then they're not gonna discriminate against me when I'm too frail to do something about it. That shouldn't be a reason for somebody to transition. They should transition their body if that's what they feel they need to do, not because they worry that they're not gonna be treated well when they're vulnerable. And other folks are making decisions right now. Okay, they'll say, I probably won't land in care for 20 years, so I'm educating as much as I can. I'm advocating as much as I can right now to try to make things be different by the time I get there. And where there was hope and optimism, it was because people felt like they had 20 years before they were gonna get that care. Society is changing, people are more aware, and they're banking on, I'm banking on, that things are gonna be different by the time we need that care. Or because they've got a trusted caregiver who already has their back and is willing to take up that advocacy and make sure that their loved one is gonna get the care they need, because they've found a well-trained provider like Park Nicolette, where they know and trust who is providing that care and they know they can get in there. So those are some of the pieces. There was less about dementia, and we didn't ask specifically about it, but I did put up quotes about that came from the interviews in particular. There's a real fear about losing identity in dementia. You know, folks worked really hard, and this identity and living in it is hard won. And so am I just gonna forget, and Mary Grace, you said something like this just a minute ago, am I just gonna forget who I am or that I've transitioned? So this fear that this identity that took the bulk of a lifetime to be able to live in and express is gonna be gone. And the other, though, that came up from a couple of people was actually saying, I hope I get dementia before I land in one of those places, because if my mind goes sufficiently, then perhaps I won't care what's happening to me in a long-term care place. So the idea of dementia being a better alternative than the oppression that folks are expecting to face. All right, so that's a bit about the study. So there's limited research around aging in trans and non-binary communities, and you know, even within that, there's not a whole lot around dementia. There's starting to be a bit more right now, but a few things that that we're coming to understand. One is that there are elevated risk factors. This has come up in a couple of talks, including, was it Carla, the last person who spoke? I think, as she had talked about there being elevated rates of dementia among Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and the relationship between dementia and a lifetime of oppression that's been experienced. And I think you had a speaker earlier that talked about if you've faced a lot of adverse experiences, then the cumulative impact of that on your physical and mental well-being shows up in elevated risk factors. It's no different among trans and non-binary people. And the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in 2021, there were 2 papers presented. And I do have a link for this on the final slide in case you want to know more about it. But they did some national research comparing trans and non-binary folks and cisgender folks in older adulthood, and found that trans folks were more likely to report declines in memory or thinking and related limitations in their ability to function. And they found that there was greater frequency, and this is no surprise when you think about what's happened from the impact of oppression over a lifetime, greater frequency of cardiovascular disease, depression, diabetes, than cisgender peers. So again, it's not saying there's some magic gene in those of us who are transgender that makes it more likely we're gonna have dementia. It's more understanding the overlay of what it means to face past and present discrimination and what that does to mental and physical well-being, and the ways that those mean where we've got a higher likelihood of ending up with dementia. And then this issue of time, which I already had raised, which is if you're coming into your identity and living it in middle age or older adulthood, which many folks do, and it's been hard won, you know, coming into this identity means that you can walk through the world as yourself, and there is such a joy and such a release in being yourself and walking through the world as who you are, but it comes at a real cost. People lose family, they lose friends, they may lose community, they may lose jobs. They may not lose family, but they may lose closeness with family, or they may lose family for a time, or they may lose a bunch of family, and some family are still with them, but on their own terms, where there need to be constraints on how they express themselves, how much their gender identity is validated in order to maintain family. So family relationships are a bit complex, right? Some people have more close family that stay around than others, but there's no guarantee. And that's just a thing to understand, that even if people have family or have people to write down, that doesn't mean that they're gonna, when push comes to shove, be that close caregiving circle that's gonna provide that emotional support, that social support, or even that advocacy for their trans or non-binary loved one to be treated as who they are when they're getting care. So let's see, we've talked about oppression, we talked about family. There's another piece which is around changes in gender identity or expression. So sometimes this is dementia related, right? As you know, memory peels back, and so there's a real fear and concern. What happens if I forget who I am? What if I start to live as who I tried to live as for so long? And that certainly is a real fear and a reality. But there's another piece with that, which is, you know, there's less inhibition. That's one of the characteristics, right, of someone who has dementia. And sometimes you've got someone who is cisgender or has lived a life as cisgender, who in this period of time feels the inhibition lift, and they're able to express their gender or come into their gender identity in a way that they held themselves back from doing beforehand. Sometimes that happens. And so how a person wants to express themselves in older adulthood when they have a dementia diagnosis, it may or may not be about dementia. It may be about living into who they are. Because we've lived in a society where in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even later, this hasn't been an identity that you can easily own and operate in, right?
Right.
Yeah. It may also be that a trans or non-binary older adult starts to hold themselves back from expressing their gender as it is. And that may be safety related. Again, there's a fear of what happens when they're not able to care for themselves. And so maybe I'm holding that back, and it's because I'm afraid for my safety and feel like I can't trust a caregiver, or I've been given reason to not trust a caregiver, right? So just a few things to consider that might be a bit distinct. Yeah, let's see. There's this great article. Well, I'm an academic, right? It's a bit of a nerd. So it's an academic article that Barrell and Silverman put out this year. And if you're interested in reading it and can't get it for free, my email address is on the final slide, and it's in there. Drop me a line and I'm happy to give you a copy. But what they did is they looked through the literature and looked through approaches that are being taken with trans and non-binary folks in dementia, who have dementia, and looked at those approaches, and then offered some thoughts about it and some challenges. And so one approach that gets used is gender neutralization, which is, you know, just avoiding gender entirely, which can come from a good place, right? If there's a person in front of me, and I don't know how they want to be referred to because I've gotten different signals from them, or the memory's starting to peel back or something, I'll just avoid gender entirely. I'll do whatever I need to do with my verbal gymnastics to never refer to them with a pronoun. I will put them in the most gender-neutral outfit I can muster, and we'll just skip the whole topic. But for folks who have had to work really hard to claim their gender, that's not what people would probably want, right? And so the approach that is used the most often is affirmation. So who was this person at the onset of their dementia? If this is a trans or non-binary person, we're gonna continue to relate to this person as who they were when they, at the onset of dementia, regardless. Because this person worked really hard to claim and live into their identity, and we're gonna make sure that it is sustained for the rest of their lifetime. And that is the approach that is usually taken. Barrel and Silverman, though, offer a couple challenges there. One is recognizing fluidity. Again, for some people, that gender identity isn't static. And so it may be that gender changes a bit. And they argue, you know, why can't you just listen to and respect what someone's self-determination is? If someone is in front of you and says, I want a dress today, that's what I want you to put me in. Don't put me in those pants. Or don't you dare put me in that nightgown, I need a set of pajamas, or whatever it is. Why can't we listen to and uphold what someone says they want for themselves? And so they offer a few challenges in there. You know, one, you know, listen to what somebody says if they've got an advanced care directive. If a trans or non-binary person has contemplated this, what do they say they want to have happen? And respect that. And if you don't have that, you know, maybe you just ask on a given day, you go up and you say, hi, my name is so-and-so. I use these pronouns. I'm caring for you today. How should I refer to you? And then stick a button on them that has those pronouns to tip off everyone else around them about how to refer to that person on that given day. Have a couple of different outfits in their closet and say, which one do you want to have on today? And offer a bit of a spectrum in case that is a person who varies on any given day. All right, I'm gonna stop there. That's probably enough. And I'm gonna let you do this part.
Okay. So we have challenges and calls to action. What can you do now that you've heard our stories? Follow the wishes of the trans-binary person. Call them by their name and gender. Work to eradicate bias in care. Learn more about older transgender and non-binary people and stay involved. And if you, as a caregiver, after this conference today, see something that you learned or something how the person you're caring for, how you could make that better, do it, speak up. If you're in an institution or a business of caregiving, talk to the people, talk to the staff. Don't be afraid of staff. I mean, they really, they can make it or break it. And like in my story, it was the staff that totally made my experience wonderful. And they also allowed me, as a transgender person, to help them make new decisions in the way they handled the patient charts and patient names. This was new. This had never happened before. So I guess I'm one that doesn't hold back. If I see a wrong, I try to find a way to right it. And I want you to do the same. If you see something that's not quite right, at least question it. I think you'll be happy with yourself that you did. All right,
you.
Abel.
And if you're a caregiver and you aren't caring for someone who's trans or non-binary, maybe you just keep your eye out in case there's a trans or non-binary person in that memory support group, or ends up in the bed next to your loved one. And hopefully, we hope that, that this will help you kind of now know a bit of what you didn't know and have some sense of how you can treat us when we end up there near your loved one. And just like you said, I love that. You know, trans and non-binary folks that are old at this point really got to where they are through grit and determination and courage and advocating hard. And when we can't do it ourselves anymore, you know, lend a hand, help us do that at the end of life. So there's a few resources here, and I'm realizing that you can't see the hyperlinks. So if any of you want a copy of these electronically, again, my email address is on the final slide. I'll turn to that in a minute. Or you can just, you know, use your favorite search engine and put in any of this information. The first one on there is just a treasure trove of information. The National Resource Center on LGBT Aging, you can just look in their transgender section, and it is just a wealth of information, like studies and guidelines and groups, and it just it's a great place to go deep. Rainbow Health Minnesota is a statewide LGBTQ organization, and they have an aging initiative. So Dylan Flunker, who I mentioned earlier, and Dylan still works for them. We run a trans and non-binary elder social club. Meets once a month right now by Zoom because pandemic, although we've talked about having that start to meet sometimes in person. Meets once a month on a Friday, and we're always open to having more people join. To Survive on This Shore is this, it's a set of narratives collected from trans and non-binary older adults along with their portraits, and they're all available for free through the website. So you can read a number of life experiences from people from a variety of walks of life. That Barrel and Silverman article, that's the citation and the link for it. Again, I'm happy to pass you on a copy if you don't have a way to get it free. And then the Alzheimer's Association, that's the link to find out about those 2 studies that I cited. And those are available online for free. That's what we got.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have a few questions from in person. Katie, do you have Zoom questions too? Okay. I will start with this in-person question and switch over to Zoom. So, I would like to do more to advocate for the trans community. Are there any bills in Congress or the Senate right now to keep or create trans rights?
Oh, that's a great question.
Would you repeat that, please?
Sure. This is for someone who would like to do more to advocate for the trans community. Are there any bills in Congress or Senate right now to keep or create trans rights?
I'm not sure. You know, bills in Congress, right? That's what
Yes.
you said? You know, I watch all the time and see, and there's so many different things in state, county, local, federal. It keeps changing. And my best suggestion would be to contact your congressperson and see what they have to say about what's going on in their legislature or their office. And if there is something, and it sounds interesting to you, go ahead, do it. Jump out of your comfortable surroundings and check that out. So I would encourage you to get a hold of your congressmen and congresswomen, and maybe as you're scrolling through the internet, just keep an eye on where you see LGBTQ+. Any articles that you can read about that. We make forward progress and then we make backward progress. And now the federal government, I'm not even sure where we stand right now with the federal government. So get involved with your politician.
Yeah. There's a couple things I could add. So, you know, there were some big strides made. There's a group called the National Center for Transgender Equality, NCTE. That's a really great starting place to kind of keep up on what's happening at a national level. And they made some really good strides for us around how to get identity documents, for example, that match without quite so much hassle, helping to improve things for being able to claim our Social Security benefits, making sure that we were able to get some transition-related care through veterans benefits, through Medicare. But those are always in danger, like Mary Grace said, of being rolled back. So it matters who you vote for. So I would say if someone wants, like a really base level thing is, the people that you're planning to vote for, where do they stand on some of these issues, and how can you get more people in to make sure that the bad stuff doesn't pass and the good stuff maybe can pass. We do know right now at the other end of the age spectrum, there's all kinds of bills that have been proposed in Minnesota as well as other places that are targeting transgender kids. And their families and their providers. And there's a group called Gender Equity in Minnesota that has done some good work there. They're not the only ones, but they've done some really good work in Minnesota around that. So they could be a good source if you're trying to figure out what's happening in Minnesota. Yeah.
That's good. I know too, the Minnesota government has a web search that you can look up any bills that are in any committee. They have those listed, and then you can follow them and see how they progress through committees and what's happening with them as well. I don't know the name of the website off the top of my head to give that, but something to look forward to see what's out there.
And I would just add to that, that transgender has not, it's kind of legally and medically, it's in a newer phase because it was just removed from the DSM-5 like not too many years ago, and Medicare would have Medicare had when you would apply for transgender care services like hormones or surgical service, they had a moratorium on just absolutely refusing anything that was transgender up until 2012. That means Medicare would not even look at your request to get gender confirmation surgery. They would just deny it. Now the request has to go through as a normal request to Medicare. So, you know, it's evolving. It's like we've been around a long time, but legally and medically, we're kind of on a new edge. So what I would say is just keep up to date on as much stuff as you can see LGBTQ. You know, just look at it, peek at it. Thanks.
And there's a second part to this question. Are there any organizations that support aging trans communities that you would recommend?
So organizations that support aging trans community?
Yes.
So certainly the National Center for Trans Equality, NCTE, SAGE, which is seniors. It used to be Seniors Allied in a Gay Environment, and then they updated it. They've been around since the 70s. Seniors Advocating for GLBTQ Equality. It's something like that. So you can find them online. SAGE. They certainly do that. Yeah, those are two that I'd say are doing that work. Locally, we've got Rainbow Health Minnesota that has an aging initiative that's around all LGBTQ communities, but includes trans community. So those are a few.
Excellent. And then there's a comment here too that I think is really important to read. this person writes, I have a close friend that they passed from cancer, was non-binary, and faced great difficulty when they didn't quite fit as air quotes, trans. It was hard to find a support group, and they were suicidal. So just kind of, I guess, again, bring in the real world. This is, this happens. This is something that people are facing. And in this room, we did that, was it just the last presentation? Was like, how many people do you know? Maybe that was this morning's presentation with Gretchen, but it's like, I think there's this idea that we don't really know. Do we know someone who's trans? Do we know someone who has dementia? Yes, you absolutely do. So anyways, I don't know if you want to follow up with that too, with something more profound than what I just said, but.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, when I came out to my coworkers and executives that I had been involved in, I was just surprised how many said that they knew of a transgender in their family or a gay person in their family, and or their acquaintances. It was like, here I thought I was going to get kicked out of volunteering and I'm all alone in this matter, and it turns out that, pretty much everybody knows of someone who is gay, transgender, so we're not alone. I'm not alone.
And if you didn't know someone trans, now you do. So here we are.
Now you do.
Katie, did you want to do a Zoom question?
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any recommended resources for training and education for long-term care staff in dementia communities? I assume the question is in relation to trans.
So, do you know of people who are training, or you want me to take this question? So they're asking about trainings around long-term care for staff. Do you know any, or do you want me to answer this one?
You can answer that one.
All right. So the first resource that I've got under key resources is the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging. And in there you can find information about training. There's that SAGE that I talked about. They run a training and they've trained people to deliver that training all over the country. And that does include trans-specific modules, and I think they get into long-term care in part of it. There's also, through Rainbow Health Minnesota, one of the groups that merged to form Rainbow Health Minnesota was Training to Serve. I know about the group because I helped write the training, and it's about training care providers to work appropriately and in a welcoming way with LGBTQ older adults. And there are pieces in there that are trans-specific. So those are the two that I can think of. And through Rainbow Health, you can find a trainer to come and train long-term care staff.
That's wonderful. That's really great. I kind of have a question along that line, just a personal question. I was wondering, you made a point about how there is a lot of concern as dementia progresses that those memories of more recent times will maybe fade and there's a lot of fear about and understandably concern, will I remember that I've transitioned? Do we have, like, is that something that happens pretty commonly? I mean, I understand the fear for 100%. I'm also wondering if there's research or if there are numbers on that. Is that something that is pretty common or kind of rare? But it wouldn't matter if it was rare or not. If it happens to one person, it matters. But I'm curious.
We don't really know. I mean, one of the pieces about being kind of a marginalized community is there aren't a lot of people doing that research.
Yeah.
And, as there's more awareness, people are starting to find permission to ask and pursue those questions in research jobs. Yeah. So it just doesn't exist at this point. And so what we have to go on are anecdotes and understanding of how dementia works. And that if we know that people's memories peel back, so that, for instance, somebody who was married early in their life and then they got married later in their life, that you hear the stories about, at some point they may not recognize their current spouse but they may remember this person from their 20s. That's how we extrapolate, right?
Yep.
If that's the case, then what does somebody peel back to remembering or to embracing? But yeah, that research just isn't there yet.
How many participants did you have for your study?
So each of them were 24. So we interviewed 24 trans and non-binary older adults, and then we did focus groups, 3 groups of 8, 2 in the Twin Cities, 1 in the Twin Ports. And the overlap was, it was either 6 or 8 people were the same between the groups. So 40 to 42 people total in Minnesota. Yeah. It's hard to find people, in part because of people transitioned years ago. So trans and non-binary older adults who did manage to transition in their 20s or 30s, or even sometimes 40s, depending on their age, were told that in order to receive help to transition, they needed to erase their history, and then as soon as they could pass in society, throw off this trans label and just make it through and pass as a cisgender person. And so didn't have trans community beyond that initial part where they were transitioning. And so really are aging in a way that they're not attached to anything. And folks who have transitioned more recently, who are in older adulthood, they come into the community, and there are community groups, but they tend to be much younger, right? They're people who are adolescents and 20-somethings, and that's great because the world is changing, but there's a generation gap, right? So finding people who are trans or non-binary, finding them and then finding folks who are willing to come and meet is its own kind of trick. So we're really doing it one person at a time. Yeah.
Another question that kind of related to that, how long did it take you to recruit? Was that?
I'm trying to remember. It really was one at a time with the interviews. And but it wasn't, so I used to do research around LGBT aging. And you would find older adults who had lived kind of on the down low, and you would find one person, and then you met with them, and they trusted you, and they invited you back over, and you showed up, and there were 3 people sitting in their living room, because that was their informal network of people. And Dylan and I thought we would find something similar when we started trying to find trans and non-binary older adults, and once we started, we realized people were like, well, I knew somebody years ago when I, was in a support group as I was transitioning, but I haven't kept up on them. Or there's somebody that I sometimes see at the farmer's market, and we knew each other a long time ago, and we always nodded at each other, but they didn't know people in the same way. So it really was, we ended up recruiting through providers' offices. Anywhere we knew there was a provider who was seeing trans and non-binary patients or clients would say, hey, can we drop off some flyers? Hey, can you pass these out to your clients or your patients? And so we did some of our recruitment that way, just by people who had a trustworthy provider, a Park Nicolette, or a Smiley's, or some of the University of Minnesota, that sort of thing.
Yeah, interesting.
Can I pop in with an online question? All right. Do any of the resources that you shared, are any of those good for families that are having a hard time accepting their loved ones coming out? Any particular resources you might recommend?
Resources for families. So they're looking for resources for families who are having a hard time embracing their loved one. Do you have ideas about that? Do you have ideas about that?
I don't. Not that there's a program. Not that there's a program. Again, the internet's a good place to look, but people who I have come across, family members, and they kind of have decided if they're going to support you or not through this transition. It's very individual, but I see family members as being the hardest to, not say convince, but they're they put up the most barriers to acceptance. My daughter, we're estranged now for the most part. I had told her, we got together and we had talked and talked, and how I was looking for my identity, and it looks like that I'm going to transition. And she said, yeah, I agree with that. I'll help you with that. And, you know, the next day I get a scathing email that was just nothing what she said. And so we've been estranged now for 6 years, 7 years. She has 2 daughters, so those are my granddaughters that I have not been able to see because of that. And, you know, I try to think, what can I do to help her understand that this isn't a choice. It's who I am, who I've always been. But she was Daddy's little girl. And you know how much Daddy's little girls love their daddies. And even though I was going to be the same, I was going to present differently. I was not going to present as her father anymore. And this hurt her, I think, to the point of not wanting to know anymore. So, again, to find things to help families, it's kind of like what you get when you sign up for, I want to be transgender female. You don't go to the doctor and have them hand you a manual and tell you, all right, this is a step-by-step, you know, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do. Just like with family, there is no manual to try and get them to accept you. It's to, I always try to help them understand. I'm always open for a conversation. My extended family has been easier. Friends are also easier, and coworkers are easier to understand. But families are a tough nut. My mom is totally for me. She has since the day I told her. But my father, not so much. He won't call me by my name, calls me by my dead name. And, you know, they're in their late 80s. And for my father, it's just like, you know, I'm going to pick my battles on days that, you know, I'm more willing to fight. And I'm not feeling willing to fight Dad. You know, he's going to call me by his name, and you know, and that's going to be the way it is. So rather than get all excited, I just go, okay. I just ignore it and let it go by, and so there's a lot that, I guess, acceptance in a family is to me what I've seen as the most difficult situation. People can also be just not just say, oh, that's okay, you know, I'm good with that, but then you never hear from them again, and you know, a year later at a family reunion, or you know, longer than that even, then they might say something, but they don't really embrace you as their family member. So I would just suggest looking on the internet, grabbing all the pamphlets you can get at Pride this year, and I think there was, I can't remember the name of it right now, but there is a group that helps with explaining to different people, more so I think on the transgenders end, how to make it easier to help their family transition as they do. Yeah. And so we all make our decisions, We all know who we like. First impressions are a lot to be said. And so first impressions with family is the same thing. Oh my goodness, you're a girl. Yeah, why don't you call me by a girl's name then? So I would just say be open. Be open and let things happen on their own, because forcing a situation I've found has not made anything better. It kind of goes the other direction. So that's my thought on that.
I don't, I don't have guidance to add. You said it all, but I have a couple of resources to suggest. One is if you're up in the Northland, I don't know where this person is, there's a group called Trans Plus. You can find them on online. And they have a support group that's specifically for significant others. So that would be one place if the person's in the Northland. There's also a group called Forge, F-O-R-G-E, out of Wisconsin, and they have a transgender aging project, and they have an old school listserv, and that listserv is for significant others, family, friends, allies. So this person could get on that and ask questions of other people who have kind of been there. So those are two places I know folks could go. The other is, family therapy. Why not? Psychology Today has that whole directory where you can search. You can search for people who have a specialty in trans issues who do family therapy. And you could go with your trans or non-binary loved one and go to family therapy and learn and work it out. Or to an individual therapist, again, go on that list, find somebody who has a specialization in trans issues. Try to find someone who's cisgender so you're not dumping it to them, although they're getting paid to learn, to hold it. Find a cis therapist who can meet with you individually, who has some expertise, who can help you sort it out. Those would be my suggestions. Yeah.
That's great, thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to pass the mic. This gentleman's been waiting.
Okay, thank you. A piece of information and a question. In my work, I have opportunity to see a lot of Social Security, disability, and SSI claims, and I know there are accommodations in a binary way. So if your current identity is different than your birth identity, that can be accommodated. There is not for binary that I know of. I've never seen a claim where, and I'm wondering what the status is that for example, in terms of Social Security, but also in terms of Medicare, in terms of driver's licenses, passports, in terms of the issue of binary identification.
So binary, I was born in the 50s. There was no such thing as gender fluid or all the alphabet after LGBTQ. You were a male or you were a female. And by the time I was 5, I knew I was a female. I just knew it, and I don't know if even in our group of transgender, if that's a thing of being born a certain time, if there's more gender fluid now than there was when I was growing up. Like I said, you had two choices, and that was it. Living on Social Security, and so for Medicare, you have to qualify at a certain income range to get Medicare, or no, Medicaid. I'm sorry, I'm confusing those. But Medicare, I have, and because of my diagnosis of gender dysphoria, that can be covered by Medicare and my C plan of Health Partners Park Nicollet. So they covered the whole surgery, you know, and honestly, the surgery was close to $100,000. And I was very grateful for that, but up until 2012, that wouldn't have happened. And so, you know, I guess as things progress, as things go on, I will expect Medicare and Social Security to keep doing, you know, what I expect them to do, what they have done. I've been very happy with that aspect of transitioning. I never ran into any medical or any insurance issues because of my transgender.
Great. You had also asked about non-binary identities and getting that identification in. So just to add to what Mary Grace said, and add to that specifically, the Biden administration just has been taking on some of these issues around trans and non-binary identities. And I don't know if it started yet, but they certainly announced that that there's a passport option, a non-binary passport option now. So you can have a non-binary marker and legal identification, even if you're in a state where they haven't changed it so your driver's license can be non-binary. And if you're wondering in Minnesota about the laws, Outfront Minnesota keeps a pretty good legal page that is helpful for understanding the status of the laws right now and what steps people have to go through to change their birth certificate and driver's license. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, what do people do if they're in that situation where really it's binary and non-binary?
You walk around and you pick what's good enough, and that's how you do it. Sometimes folks who are non-binary don't want to put it on identification because if it's on your driver's license in Minnesota, you can change it. But what happens if you are somewhere that is unsafe by yourself and you get pulled over? Do you want that on your license if you don't feel safe? So people make their choices, right? Yeah.
Nothing hurts more than having to pull out a driver's license with an old picture
Yep.
and an old gender identity.
Yep.
And I'd say to anybody who wishes to transition and go through all the steps to change who you are in your legal documents, prepare to spend over a year doing it. You know, I had to live as a woman for 6 months. Then I went to court, and then they changed my identity, changed my birth certificate, and sealed my old one. But then after that, those are the high points, you know. Let Social Security know, let everybody know. And then you have everything else that your name was associated with. And it gets to be, you won't believe how many things your name is associated with. So I went through that process, and happily now most of the stuff has changed.
All right, I have another question for you. And this actually ties in with our last presentation. So would you put the transition information, history, date, place, just information about it into the memory book that Carla talked about? Or into, you know, like some kind of information for long-term care providers to see?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it would be. Abel told me like the other day that, you know, if I have a patient care directive, I should put in there that I wish to be treated female, you know, and all the things that go along with being female. So that is my wishes and my patient care directive. And I would suggest also that you do write that little story and put it in with your personal care directive. That personal care directive seems to be the document that's gonna keep following you. Not your permanent records, like your school teacher told you, but your patient care directive. And so anything that you can think of that you want people to treat you this way, or you want them to know on, well, I transitioned and this is what I did, you know, hit the high points and then go into a little bit more personal. But I think it's a great idea. And I'm gonna heed my words from Abel that get that in the patient care directive.
And give, if there's a trans or non-binary person in your life who's you know, more recently diagnosed with dementia, or trying to figure out long-term care things, and they're not in that spot where they can't self-determine, ask them, right? You know, what do you want in this narrative about you? What's important for people to understand? Because you may find that somebody is in long-term care and they go, yeah, do me a favor and don't put it there because I don't feel very safe here. You know, and I'd want to be selective about who knows this. Again, that's about what is this situation? Does this person have people who are watching them? Do the people who are caring for them know that? And is this a place where the staff's been trained and understands that they're to treat everybody with care and dignity? So some of it may come down to, is this a safe environment? So that's the clause on there. Of course, make sure that the staff knows who a person is, but make sure that they're trustworthy with that information.
Yeah. Katie, did you have any more?
Yeah, I do have another one here. Do you have any recommendations for specific care facilities that provide supportive care for elders who are transgender or non-binary? Or along those lines, do you have any recommendations when someone is touring facilities for kind of assessing how care might be? Or how supportive care might be?
I'm not sure I heard the whole thing. The first was about long-term care facilities that are trans and non-binary welcoming. But what was the second part?
Exactly. Or how would somebody know when they toured a facility if it was welcoming? Like what should people be looking for in that way?
Yeah. What do you think people should look for when they're?
It would look like, take a look and see how much staff is there. You know, that's going to give you an indication of maybe the level of care that you're going to receive, whether it's personal care. And I can't remember the name, but when I was with the Park Nicollet Foundation, there was an organization that was in the process of trying to identify LGBTQ care facilities. And so they would get like the LGBTQ stamp of approval. And I'm sorry, I don't remember what happened to that organization or the name, but I think after this program, I'm going to go home and look it up. Because they were really serious about giving the stamp of approval to organizations.
Yeah. There's so that training to serve that I mentioned earlier, they kind of did that seal of approval when they would train a group of aging service providers, and some of those were long-term care facilities. So you can at least, you don't know, there's no guarantee, right? But it at least lets you know that this is a facility that trained its staff at some point around how do you treat people well and with dignity when they're LGB or trans or non-binary. And so that would be a good place to start. I think that the Human Rights Campaign has started this long-term care equality index. That's a national organization. I haven't looked to see who they've vouched for, but that could be a place to look. If you're just touring a facility, you can straight up ask, you know, have you had trans or non-binary residents? Do you? How do you handle their care? How do you handle when there's feedback from other residents? You know, how do you assign your rooms? How do you decide who rooms together? Is that based on something legal? Is that, you know, how do they decide that? Is there a non-discrimination policy, and is it out there prominently? Is there anything up about welcoming, like in signs or pictures? So I would look for all those kinds of things. Yep.
Excellent. Do you have any more, Katie?
No, that's it.
Okay, I just have one more then. And
It's time.
last one, yep, last one here. It's just a quick question about, have you connected with any choirs for persons with dementia? That might be choirs for persons with dementia, that might be
Choirs.
a good,
Yeah, there's a choir here, Victory Chorus or something, and there's one up in Duluth
excellent.
that are but they're not trans specific, right? But they're for people with dementia and their caregivers.
Yeah.
Which one? Giving Voice. Oh, that's the name of the choir here. Giving Voice, Amazing Grace. These are not ones I know, but that folks are yelling out. That's great. I also wonder, there's One Voice Mixed Chorus in town, which is trans and non-binary folks and supporters. And I wonder if they've had folks with memory care issues who are part of it, but that might be worth checking out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I do want to say we have slides that we will be putting on our Google Drive that's in our virtual library that we will send out the link to. So everyone will have access to all the links that you were talking about, and we'll have those. But thank you very much, both of you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Professor Knochel, Mary Grace St. Clair. That was just a great way to end. It was a wonderful conference and wonderful to have so many of you here in person again, and certainly for those of you online. Some final reminders here before we adjourn. We still have a table full of resources back there, free DVDs, free senior care guidebooks. Please consider taking some of those. Again, all free, all for you. If you haven't filled out a registry form for those in person, please make a point to do that, one of the colored forms. Also, fill out an evaluation form with feedback. Again, that's very important for us. It helps us craft topics for future conferences. And finally, if you did purchase CEUs, please see Teresa Schicker at the registration desk. She'll have those for you as well. Those of you online, you'll be getting a Zoom link for both the evaluation of today's conference. You'll also be getting a link of a quiz that we'll ask you to take. And once you complete that quiz successfully, you also will be receiving your CEU certificate if you did indeed purchase them. Thank you all. Again, we are always available at the University of Minnesota, myself, my tremendous team, many of whom you've met here today. We're always here to help. So if you have questions, you have concerns, if you'd like us to come out and speak to your organization or community, let us know, and we're always happy to talk. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you again from all of us at the University of Minnesota, and we'll be seeing all of you soon. Thank you again.